Bottom line, these globalists see America's traditional and fundamental calling, our shining beacon of freedom and liberty for all, as the one thing left standing in their way to global technocracy and total control of mankind. Listen to me, please. Here's how they would change our Pledge of Allegiance. If this ignorant, radical, un-American rebellion from the left were to succeed under Biden, who of course, Biden-Harris ticket, of course, being a shill for these globalist corporations aligned with communist China, would be nothing but a puppet for the designs that they have to change our culture. But here's how they would change the Pledge of Allegiance. Here's how it would go if these global corporations are able to dominate the planet. I pledge allegiance to the flag. You'd still pledge to the flag. Don't worry. The flag might not even change. It might become like if there's, they might finally decide to tell us how many of these corporations they actually want to acknowledge. And so maybe there'd be, I don't know, 15, 20 of them. So we might have like 15, 20 stars instead of 50. But here's how the pledge would go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United Corporations of America and to the global corporations for which it stands, one government under Bill Gates, with conformity and surveillance for all. Let's all put our hand over our heart. I can't bring myself to do it. I was going to act it out and I can't put my hand over my heart as a patriot, as a veteran, to mock that, to pretend. So we'll just leave it without me having actually done this part. Let's do it again. I just want you to hear that again because cuts right to the chase. Here's how the new pledge will go. This is what they want. This is the agenda that they want. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United Corporations of America and to the global corporations for which it stands, one government under Bill Gates, with conformity and surveillance for all. And I'll feel so safe because Bill Gates gives me all the vaccines I need to keep me safe. I don't need my freedom. I don't need to celebrate my holidays. I don't need to go visit my grandma who's in the nursing home that they're isolating with this pandemic. I don't need to have freedom to do what I want without everybody, the big tech seeing everything I do. I just need to feel safe. I'm Connie Bryan, and you're watching The Connie Bryan Show. This, of course, another We the People special edition taped on Sunday, November 29th, 2020. First of all, let me just start off by reminding you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel because that really helps me right now with all the shadow banning and algorithm crap that YouTube is using to deprioritize alternative media programs like mine that are really your source of getting truth and honest truth and ethical truth that's not just a false narrative from the sorry excuse for news that the media has become. It's not the news, it's just propaganda. With all of that going on, especially on YouTube, and they're making it so much harder for people to find programs like mine, when you subscribe to the show and when you share it, it really helps immensely going against their efforts to try to keep it from being found. So if you seek out my program, type in The Connie Bryan Show on YouTube, and then you'll definitely pull it up, but it doesn't organically come up like it normally used to after they started doing all this algorithm crap to target programs like mine. So I'm just saying, when you subscribe to the show, the more people that subscribe to it, it goes against those algorithms and helps us get more traction. And so I could really use more of you subscribing to the show there on YouTube. Secondly, I created a Patreon platform for those of you who might have the means and might consider actually financially supporting the show. I've really amped up production. I've started doing a lot more programming. It takes so much time and effort. I am doing so much researching. You wouldn't believe just what it takes to take in content and get prepared and for every episode, and then the editing. So if you have the means and if you would consider it, check out my platform, my newest platform at Patreon. It's patreon.com. I'll put it up on screen, /ConnieBryan. You'll find the show there, The Connie Bryan Show, and there'll be an option to become a patron, which is a sponsor. And last but not least, before I get into the thick of what we're going to talk about, with all of this panic-demic, as I like to call it, it has just really hurt entertainers like you wouldn't believe. I'm an entertainer, I'm a musician, professional entertainer. Remember, I told you all, some of you will remember who've been watching regularly, that I just got back from being on the road with my music from out in Montana and Wyoming and South Dakota. And I did that because California was so insane about shutting down anywhere where you could do live music. Even now, you've probably heard in the news where they went so far as to tell people like Gavin Newsom and his ridiculous, insane Nazi Thanksgiving restrictions, saying you can't even sing. This is just, I mean, it's mind-blowing, the level of insanity that we're witnessing right now in our country. It's so anti-American, and we're going to get to that. That's the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about here in a second. But what I want to ask is, with how this has so impacted people like me who look to perform for a living, I'd like to have some private freedom parties where we get together, especially with the holidays coming up. I'd like to have a few freedom parties, and I'd love to, bring my music for the entertainment and have a really good time. So if you're interested in doing something like that and helping me throw some freedom parties, I'll put my email up, and hit me up and let me know you'd like to be part of that, and we can talk about the arrangements to set up that booking. So let's get right to it. The title of this episode, the headline for this episode, and it's based on my op-ed article that you'll find on my website, on my blog. It's entitled, America's Calling, Have You Lived Up to It? So let's get right into it. America's calling, our purpose, was to be a great shining light. A great shining light of equality and individual freedom. Hence the gift our nation received from France. You know what that was? Of course, I'm talking about the majestic Statue of Liberty and her shining flame she holds up so proudly in the New York Harbor. That is the flame of equality and liberty that our nation ostensibly, supposedly stands for. But we know our nation has not lived up to that calling. And I know some of you are going to be shocked when I say this, because you know that I've jumped ship from the Democratic Party after this insanity, this communist Marxist crap that they've compromised themselves with. But I'm just going to say it. This is important, because this is why I originally switched from the Republican Party to begin with years ago. Our nation not living up to that calling of standing up and shining a beacon of light for equality and liberty for all not living up to that calling has largely come from the right in the past. Okay? Often due to the mass hypocrisy of those who, while they love to refer to themselves as patriots, did not believe in equality for all mankind. I mean, think about it. We use the term mankind. For the longest time, they wouldn't even let women vote. So, all right, that was a huge accomplishment. It was men had equality. Women had to wait for, I don't know, something like 100 years or more to get the right to vote. These people I'm referring to on the right believed in liberty for their kind, whether it be for their Caucasian race or their religious belief system, which was normally Christian, but certainly not equality for all. Good God, equality for all. Don't be preposterous, they would say behind closed doors among their like-minded conservatives usually, at their country clubs or their Baptist church covered dish suppers, I know. Okay, flashback, because that's where I grew up, what I grew up around. So that, my friends, is exactly at the root of how we ended up right here where we are today, facing this huge threat to our free republic's future. Because of the number of conservatives like that who willfully refuse to listen to many, many voices like mine over the years, in my case over the last 20 years or so, as many of us have been aggressively speaking out for real patriotic reform to stop that massive hypocrisy that has been polluting our nation's true calling of equality and liberty for all. Now, what I am about to say, I want you to understand that I say it as a patriot. I say it as a veteran of the armed forces, as a traditional liberal Democrat. Traditional liberal Democrat is not the liberals and radicals that have taken over the Democratic Party that we've seen show their ugly, horrifying face, especially over this last year. And what I'm about to say, I say it as a traditional liberal Democrat who sees right now that Americans have no choice but to support Republicans and conservatives on the right in the face of this existential threat that has arisen from within our nation. And this threat has sadly arisen within our nation with the successful hijacking of the Democratic Party by global corporations aligned with communist China. But the thing is, not even like terrorists forcibly hijacking a plane. When you hear me say they've hijacked the Democratic Party, your tendency is to envision terrorists with box cutters and knives and guns, whatever, trying to forcibly take over the cockpit of a... No. That's the crazy thing about this. Not at all like that. It's like the Democratic Party freaking invited them on board and taught them how to fly the Democratic plane. And just like with the 9/11 hijackers, the global corporations aligned with China said when it came time to learn how to land the Democratic plane, the Democrats said, yeah, okay, we're letting you in here. No, come right in. No, we didn't lock the door. Yeah, we left the door unlocked for you to the cockpit. Come right in. Sit down in the cockpit. Here, who wants to be the co-pilot? Who wants to be the navigator? We're going to show you how to fly the plane. Now that we've shown you how to fly the plane, we need to show you how we're going to land it. And they said, just like the 9/11 hijackers, it came to light when they were learning how to go into the flight schools. They said, we don't care about learning how to land the plane. And that was not a red flag. Are you freaking kidding me? So That's what happened here. The global corporation just said to them when they were taking over the Democratic Party plane, yeah, screw that. We don't have time. We don't give a damn about landing the plane, okay? No, because their plans are to crash it, destroy it, and destroy our country and redesign it in their interests, their tyrannical interests. If we are to be like I pledge to you, you can always count on me being, and that is intellectually honest, meaning fair-minded, we must face the truth that there has ironically been so much hypocrisy on the conservative right for so long, for too long, and that is because of that, it has finally and ironically caused a similarly hypocritical mass rebellion by the younger generation. And in doing so, not just rebelling by, supporting traditional liberal values like mine that are strongly patriotic. No. That wouldn't be a rebellion, really. That's not that far off. A traditional liberal doesn't disagree with many of the things a moderate conservative believes in. So in rebelling, in this similarly hypocritical mass rebellion from the younger generation, because of all the hypocrisy that has been going on over the years from the right, it's been a rebellion much like the stereotype of like a child of an evangelical preacher who the child rebels intentionally to this bipolar extreme level of becoming a drug dealer or a devil worshiper or something like that. That's the level of rebellion we are seeing with the Democratic Party having been hijacked and what we're seeing from these radical leftists. Today, with this present coup attempt we are witnessing from the left, we are now seeing the consequences. We are now seeing the fallout of hundreds of years of hypocritically corrupt, politically corrupt, racist, homophobic, religious, systemic bigotry, routinely practiced more and more, as I said earlier, from those who call themselves conservatives than from anyone else. I'm not saying it hasn't come from anywhere else, but it's been seen most prominent from people on the right in this country who like to call themselves conservative patriots. Hence the astounding hypocrisy and not living up to our nation's calling of being a shining beacon of liberty and equality for all. Talk about the word unsustainable. Such a chronic level of corrupt hypocrisy could never last without what we're seeing, without a major fallout like what we're seeing right now, just as we saw with our nation's first civil war. That war was a similar result of the mass hypocrisy of the industry of human slavery perpetrated on African Americans for hundreds of years. Again, entirely a result of this unconscionable, utterly unsustainable level of mass hypocrisy, largely emanating from where? From the right over the years. This has resulted naturally in a recoiling in anger, and that's an understatement. This hypocrisy throughout our nation's history, this shameful hypocrisy, not living up to our calling, but actually, behaving in the exact opposite way, has resulted in a recoiling in anger from young people who, a decade or so ago, if you'll recall, tried to deal with it more appropriately in demanding reform with their Occupy movement, the Occupy Wall Street, and then that grew to Occupy New York City, every city had their own Occupy. We had it here in Sacramento, Occupy Sacramento. Davis had it. And it was a wonderful grassroots movement led by young people at the time. It was like 10, 15 years ago. But the hypocrites, of course, refused to listen. The hypocrites that I'm talking about from the right, they mocked them. They were having nothing of any kind of reform that might threaten their good old boys system in America, and they succeeded in undermining the Occupy movement that was all about needed reforms in order to live up to what? To live up to our nation's calling of equality and liberty for all. That's what the Occupy movement was all about. Young people had it right at that time. They weren't engaging in Marxist violence. They weren't trying to partner with global corporations aligned with China. They were all about understanding it's about we the people and trying to get power back to we the people. And they were mocked by these hypocrites on the right. Now, as a result, we are seeing the recoiling on steroids this time. The recoiling to a level previously unimaginable, to a dangerous extreme, that unknowingly to many of its participants on the left, unknowingly to many of these young people taking part in this recoiling that we're seeing, this communist Marxist stuff, is being exploited by global powers who have the destruction of the American dream as their top agenda. Unbeknownst to these angry liberal radical Marxists, I hate to use the term liberal because they're just not, when I think of a liberal, I think of people like me, traditional liberals who are patriots who aren't going to stand for this shit. All right? So unbeknownst to these angry radical Marxist wannabes in the Democratic Party, they are completely playing into the hands of the very inhumane epitome of evil that ironically, they themselves hypocritically like to claim they are ostensibly, supposedly against. That being what? That being the totalitarian corporate monopolies, i.e., big tech, big pharma, big banks, and un-American globalist corporations aligned with communist China that seek to extinguish America's shining light of liberty and personal independence. And these radical wannabe Marxist Democrats unknowingly are actually playing into their hands. These global elites aligned with communist China are exploiting this radical, violent, ignorant, acting out from the left group. And our nation has never been in such danger, as I said above earlier, since our first Civil War. Okay? We are in dire straits, dire peril right now, just like we were at the start, just prior to our first Civil War. We are on the dangerous precipice of a second one right now. If anybody tries to downplay that, they're an idiot. The truth is, we are on a dangerous precipice right now. There's already been shooting from the left at conservatives. There's already been, I can't remember the number, how many, it's something like 30, 40, 50 cops killed because of this Marxist left-wing violence. We even saw one video that the person came up and just shot him right there in the squad car. And fortunately, they survived. One got hit in the jaw, one got hit in the stomach or chest or something. They both managed to survive. But we've seen unbelievable restraint coming from the right in the face of mass violence already, where the left has tried to cause this civil war. So we're on the edge right now. What is the answer? I'm sure many of you are asking that question. You probably talk with your friends probably on a regular basis. What do we do? You see what I'm talking about, and you're like, what's the answer? Well, you know what the answer is. The answer is, of course, that we, the people, must rise up en masse, you and I, en masse, from all political parties and support the Republican Party right now in doing whatever it takes. Did you hear me? We have to support the Republican Party. We have to support the right, because right now, even with the history, the problematic history and hypocrisy that the right has been guilty of in so many cases, right now it's the right, it's the Republicans, it's Trump, the only candidate, standing up against China, standing up against this threat to the American dream. We have to support the Republican Party right now in doing whatever it takes to take our nation back from this left-wing anti-American rebellion, a rebellion that, while it was in fact fomented by such systemic, long-standing, inexcusable hypocrisy and bigotry on the right, it is being massively exploited, as I said now, by a coup attempt orchestrated by even more nefarious global powers. So you have to get your head straight about this. What we're looking at, this is a coup attempt orchestrated by even more nefarious powers than just the hypocrisy that we've seen from the right over the years. Because no matter how much you can't stand Trump, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, how I never thought, ever thought I could find myself supporting that guy. He was never coming after your liberty and ability, to have your children go to school and be able to operate your small business, your self-independence, your ability to provide for yourself and your family. He was always about that. Always about supporting small business and free enterprise. No matter what you think of him, I'm going to get to that, like I said, in a second. But the thing is, that's who's standing in the lurch right now. The Republican Party, Patriot Americans, and we need all Patriot Americans like myself from all parties coming together, rising up en masse and supporting them in taking our nation back. Because this is a coup attempt orchestrated by even more nefarious global powers bent on one thing. They're bent on bringing about the end of America's free independence. They want to bring about an end to our shining light of liberty for all. That's the one thing they're bent on. What these global powers that have hijacked the Democratic Party want, first and foremost, is not liberty for all. That is the last thing they want. They want control for all. They want big tech surveillance for all. Can't you see that? If you can't see it, pull your head out of your ass. America's calling, our purpose, as I said at the start of the show, was to be a symbol of freedom and self-independence, not just for our nation people, but for the world. Do you understand how much of a major threat that is to these global corporate elites? Do you understand how much of a threat the symbol that we give, our calling to give to the world, that shining beacon of liberty and freedom and self-independence, do you realize how much of a threat that is to these global corporate elites' nefarious agenda of control? Have you stopped to think about that? The last thing they want is for freedom and independence to spread to the world. That means masses and masses of humanity awakening to their own strong personal freedom and independence, and not being dependent on those elite global corporations who are aligned with China. Understand this. That is, figuratively speaking, that is what they think the real pandemic threat is. I say figuratively speaking. That's the real pandemic threat they see to their continued elite existence. That spreading to the world, freedom and self-independence, is what they see as a true pandemic threat to their sick plans for global corporate domination of this planet. The freedom and self-independence and the equality of every human being. Let me say that again. These are such beautiful concepts here. The freedom and self-independence and the equality of every human being, which is what America's calling is. What a beautiful thing. Oh no, that is not what these global corporate elites believe. They see that as the ultimate dangerous thing to their survival going forward. That is what they see, again, figuratively speaking, as a potential lethal worldwide infection that they need to inoculate against. I got to say that again because it just encapsulates the whole show. That line right there. Freedom, self-independence, the equality of every human being. That is what they see, figuratively speaking, as a potential lethal worldwide infection that they need to inoculate everyone against. And by the way, on a side note, there is a long-standing eugenics, population control, resetting and redesigning of humankind element behind their global agenda of control that is even more nefarious. And I may get into that more in the near future. Bottom line, these globalists see America's traditional and fundamental calling, our shining beacon of freedom and liberty for all, as the one thing left standing in their way to global technocracy and total control of mankind. Listen to me, please. Here's how they would change our Pledge of Allegiance. If this ignorant, radical, un-American rebellion from the left were to succeed under Biden, who of course, Biden-Harris ticket, of course, being a shill for these globalist corporations aligned with communist China, would be nothing but a puppet for the designs that they have to change our culture. But here's how they would change the Pledge of Allegiance. Here's how it would go if these global corporations are able to dominate the planet. I pledge allegiance to the flag. You'd still pledge to the flag. Don't worry. The flag might not even change. It might become like if there's, they might finally decide to tell us how many of these corporations they actually want to acknowledge. And so maybe there'd be, 15, 20 of them. So we might have like 15, 20 stars instead of 50. But here's how the pledge would go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United Corporations of America and to the global corporations for which it stands, one government under Bill Gates, with conformity and surveillance for all. Let's all put our hand over our heart. I can't bring myself to do it. I was going to act it out and I can't put my hand over my heart as a patriot, as a veteran, to mock that, to pretend. So we'll just leave it without me having actually done this part. Let's do it again. I just want you to hear that again because cuts right to the chase. Here's how the new pledge will go. This is what they want. This is the agenda that they want. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United Corporations of America and to the global corporations for which it stands, one government under Bill Gates, with conformity and surveillance for all. And I'll feel so safe because Bill Gates gives me all the vaccines I need to keep me safe. I don't need my freedom. I don't need to celebrate my holidays. I don't need to go visit my grandma who's in the nursing home that they're isolating with this pandemic. I don't need to have freedom to do what I want without everybody, the big tech seeing everything I do. I just need to feel safe. God dang it. What a lot of you may not have heard, but that is critical for you to understand, is that China's top generals have already been exposed for their open discussion within their country, in which they have repeatedly stated on record that they see themselves already at war with the United States on a cyber, psychological, sustained level of aggression. Did you hear that? Are you hearing me? China already acknowledging, their top generals, we are already at war with the United States, have been for a long time, and the current aggressive war that we are waging is a psychological, cyber, sustained level of aggression. It's important that you understand that. You're not going to hear that in the mainstream media because they're keeping all the important news from you. It's all just a false narrative controlled by China and these global corporations, that a narrative, a false narrative they want you to hear. Communications by these top Chinese generals have been brought to light where they have been saying that they prefer using that current method they have been using for some time now, that being the information propaganda war. They prefer using that over a full-on conventional shooting war. But, you ready for this? But they have also been saying that they are confident that if their PSYOPs infiltration of America method does not fully succeed, they have said they are confident they can easily prevail in a full-on conventional war. Why? Due to what they perceive as a growing, vulnerably weak and unhealthy nature of the American people. You and I know we're not weak. You and I, we know the majority of us are not weak-natured. The majority of us. But we can now clearly see the shocking number of weak-minded sheep among us, mostly within what has become of the Democratic Party that I'm not long for. I got my party, change of party paperwork when I voted. I'm just trying to decide if I'm going to be an independent or if I'm going to switch back to the Republican Party. We can clearly see how these weak-minded sheep, largely within the Democratic Party, have sheepishly allowed themselves to be compromised by this propaganda war from these globalist corporations partnered with China in an ongoing, sustained brainwashing effort that we now see nonstop in the corporate-owned mainstream media that I was just talking about. All they do is give you this narrative, this PSYOPs narrative. Okay, that's all it is. It's this propaganda PSYOPs narrative that these global corporations aligned with China are barraging and brainwashing many of you with. You've got to stop watching CNN. You're watching the Chinese news network, okay? That's what that stands for. CNN, the Chinese news network. Might as well be the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. You know, you're watching NBC, that'd be the National Broadcasting of China. Okay, I'm done making those jokes. So these weak-minded sheep have chosen, they've made the decision, but actually it's because they've been brainwashed. They've been led like sheep to this decision to represent the global corporations. But we, the people, we greatly outnumber their sheep numbers. Don't forget that. And we, the people, are wolves. Okay? Don't forget. That's what you're supposed to be. Okay? Your calling is not just to be a shining beacon of light for liberty and equality and justice, but that means your calling is for you to be a wolf compared to a sheep. All right? You see the analogy? We the people, we remember We patriots, we remember how we were raised to be strong and independent by our grandparents and our great-grandparents. They raised you to be wolves, not sheep. And if they were here today, they would shame many of those out there. There may be some watching. Hopefully most of you watching aren't in the category. But they would, if they were here today, they would shame many of those on the left for their un-American, weak, sheep-like acquiescence to this globalist threat to our nation. So if you have an ounce of patriotism in your soul, and I know many of you watching do, no matter what political party you may technically be a member of, especially if you're a Democrat like I am, if you have an ounce of patriotism in you at all, you are now standing with your brothers and sisters on the right within the Republican Party and taking our nation back from this attempt to destroy it that is shockingly now coming from the Democratic Party, which has shamefully aligned itself with this global corporate agenda that's aligned with communist China. Now, in closing, I never dreamed, like I said earlier, I never dreamed in a million freaking years that I'd find myself supporting Donald Trump until this shocking corruption and existential threat to our nation revealed itself just this year from the Democratic Party. I didn't see it coming. It blindsided me. The Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party anymore. To put it in a nutshell, it has become the Western extension, as it were, of the People's Republic of global corporations in China. That's what the Democratic Party has become. It's become the Western extension of the People's Republic of global corporations in China. Donald Trump, despite his corrupt, lifelong con artist and dishonest, deceitful character that I loathe and that I could list here at length, has proven to ironically, despite all that, has proven to be the only candidate standing between preserving the American dream for we the people and its complete destruction led by those communist China-aligned global corporate powers that have hijacked the Democratic Party. Though the mainstream reality show media, because that's what they are, I like to call them the reality show media, though they have worked overtime to hide the massive evidence of monumental election fraud, it is truly a massive amount of evidence, folks, coming to light. Now we have multiple state legislators holding hearings, despite them trying to hide it in the media. Now we have multiple state legislators in these battleground states that are now agreeing to hold hearings and exposing this powerful election fraud evidence after partisan circuit courts and partisan judges have shamefully dropped the ball on purpose, deliberately. So here's what I have to say about this in the election fraud. Trump very likely can prevail in the coming weeks, as these swing states where the election fraud was most concentrated are largely Republican-controlled legislatures. Already, a majority of Pennsylvania legislators, after hearing the monumental and striking degree of evidence presented before them from eyewitnesses, not just Sidney Powell, the attorney, or Rudy Giuliani, telling them about it. No, they have had, I watched it myself. I watched one of the hearings myself. It was amazing. They had many witnesses right there. Each would be getting 10 or 15 minutes, and they would tell their stories that are backed up by affidavits they had signed of what they had witnessed. So it's powerful evidence from eyewitnesses speaking to these at these legislature hearings in these battleground states going on right now as I'm taping this episode. In person, these witnesses talking to these legislators. Already, as a result of that, Pennsylvania legislators have announced a resolution to have their state legislators take over selecting the state's electoral college electors. That's huge. I know it gets a little bit into the weeds, but instead of Biden automatically getting, I think it's 20 electoral votes. What these state legislators have done, and they're the majority Republican legislators in Pennsylvania, they've just completed a resolution to put forward demanding that that be put aside, and that state legislators, they do have the right to do this, to then be allowed to pick the electoral voters, in which case they would pick for Trump. So see, this is a huge development. This is a resolution that the stage we're at right now, it's a resolution that they've just drafted. We'll see where it goes. Also, in closing, in recent unprecedented move just a few days ago, an unprecedented move by the Supreme Court, they reassigned their Supreme Court justices regarding which circuit courts that they are going to supervise. So each circuit court and appeals court of every state, there's a certain Supreme Court justice that presides over it if it ever comes up to the Supreme Court that they have to rule. Well, now this is unprecedented, and it just happened in the last few days. The U.S. Supreme Court reassigned its supervising justices over the key battleground states' circuit and appeals courts. You follow me here? This is huge. It's never been done. It's unprecedented. And what the Supreme Court did, maybe you see this coming, what I'm going to tell you, they placed 4 of the conservative justices over those key battleground states. All right? Obviously, why? Obviously, in preparation for this, to come to them for an ultimate decision. Now, this was all but ignored. I know you're going, what? I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that on CNN, on the Chinese. Oh, you didn't hear that on the Chinese news network? Really? You didn't hear that on NBC? You didn't hear that on PBS? Oh, for crying out loud. What's wrong with them? I don't know. Could it be Satan? No, I'm just kidding. All of a sudden I had the church lady come to mind. That's the other thing from the right. They've got to stop doing this whole, it's all satanic. It's the devil. You know, come on. If we're going to get everybody rallying together, let's stop it with the dogma, the religious dogma from the right. It is ignorance. It is evil, but you know, it's not the devil. Good grief. This was all what I'm telling you about the Supreme Court reassigning its justices over the battleground states' circuit courts. All but ignored by the mainstream media. You had to go looking deep beyond CNN and MSNBC to find this powerful blockbuster news coming out of the Supreme Court. And it's huge good news for Donald Trump's chances of overturning the fraudulent election results. Let me just add the fact that the reality show media is trying so hard to keep this kind of truth from you, the American people. The fact that they're trying so hard to do that, this is so important, folks. The fact that the reality show media, the mainstream media, is trying so hard to keep real truth from you and censoring those of us that are trying to bring it, only belies and showcases just how afraid they really are. If they were confident, if they knew they hadn't tried to steal the election for the left, if they knew that was preposterous, they'd have no problem letting all this be covered, covering it, talking about it. It would give them great content, and they could mock it, and say, this is ridiculous. If they knew they weren't guilty, they wouldn't be constantly going dark on Donald Trump's comments on Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. They all wouldn't be censoring all of us, censoring everyone who tries to share an opposing opinion, tries to share election fraud facts. Okay? The media wouldn't be going dark on all of that. They'd be bringing it out, saying, look, can you believe they're saying this? We didn't do this. Let's mock this. But no, they want to shut it down and keep it from you because they're scared to death. Okay? They can't stand the thought of any of this coming out at all because they're so afraid of you hearing it and believing it and understanding it to be true. Because it is. If they had not been complicit in this fraud and this coup attempt to undermine our nation, they would not be engaging in such un-American banning of free speech. The fact that they are doing so in such a frenzied fashion reveals their very complicity behind this global agenda of control. Now, the good news is, in closing, the good news is we, the people, have seen through that fraud and that corporate threat aligned with China. So there is a lot of good news. The good news is the majority of us are not weak-natured like China is hoping would ultimately be the case. And we are waking up and we are rising up together now, and we are taking our nation back. All right? You can take that to the bank. Despite this temporary insanity from the Democratic Party that has placed our nation in such ridiculous peril, which should have never happened. So as we protect our American calling, as we take our nation back, we must realize it is time for ethical reform across the board. It may be time for a third party, a powerful third party, whether we call it the Reform Party, whether we call it the American Party, whether we call it the 99ers, for the 99%, for we the people. But now, as we protect our American calling and take our nation back, we have to realize something very important because of the history of hypocrisy that has brought us here, that has caused this rebellion on the left, even though it's ridiculously too extreme, going actually behaving on behalf of the enemy. But we got to this place, as I said at the start of the show, because the hypocrites refused to allow reform that we desperately needed, that many times was being called for, that was being called for by young people 10, 15 years ago with the Occupy movement. All right? So as we take our nation back this time, we have to remember and realize it is time way overdue for ethical reform across the board in order to live up to our American calling of liberty, equality, and justice for all. That means we have to clean house of all the elected representatives who sold us out to these global corporate elites. We have to clean house. They don't represent us, these elected representatives. We have to clean house of all the elected representatives who sold us out to these global corporate elites. That means we have to diligently elect new leaders who go through a careful vetting process, and it won't be hard to put together that vetting process, and who will not only represent we the people first and foremost, who will not only strongly regulate and deprioritize corporations and elevate and super prioritize we the people, but who will also implement the desperately needed ethical reforms to our democratic system overall. Ethical and equality-based reforms. Ethical and equality-based reforms to our nation's police departments that I personally have seen firsthand are long overdue. They're long overdue for reform from their age-old good old boy systems. Ethical reforms to all of our government institutions so that we finally stop being hypocrites and actually live up to our nation's calling to be the ethical, shining beacon of liberty, equality, and justice. And not just for the elite few, not just for our citizens, but the shining beacon of liberty, equality, and justice for all of humanity. Thank you for tuning into the program. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.